Does Substack audio suck? The entire month of November last year, I experimented with audio on Substack and I gave little drips of information as I was learning that side of Substack after 3 years of being on there as a newsletter writer. But I really wanted to have one central place where I put the main suckiness and probably not suckiness, depending on how we do with time. And that's it in one place. And this is it. This is the episode. This is the live event. If you're joining us live at any point, feel free to use, actually at live or even after, feel free to leave comments. Feel free to leave comments and I will get to them as I can. Also, big announcement, I've just revamped all of my services over at Coffee Like Media, which is the sponsor of this Coffee Like Experiments podcast. And I'm going to help people get unstuck. It's what I've been doing anyway, but whether you're starting a podcast and you need help in that initial push, you're stuck, maybe you're 6 months or a year in and you need a little bit of a clarity moment, a little bit of a shove. I'm calling them momentum consultation calls, momentum calls, because the momentum is stuck and we need to get you going again. I also still have monthly services. But honestly, I think the momentum calls right now are the most cost-efficient way and the most momentum-dense way for you to get your podcast back on track or going in the beginning. Anyway, I'll put a link in the show notes or video notes depending on where you are consuming this. But I just wanted to let you know that is our sponsor, and it is. So I'll put that in the notes right there. Okay, let's get to this. So I do have 5 things that suck about Substack audio, and I have 5 things in my notes, and I do have 5 things that don't suck. So we'll see how far I can get. I do have some visuals, but I'm not honestly truly positive that they're needed. So we'll see what happens with this. Okay. So let's see. The first one are the show notes. Okay. So the show notes in Substack, how do I explain this? You create the Substack post, and at the top of the post is the audio. You're probably a subscriber to Coffee Like Experiment Substack, so you've probably seen this before. What you don't know is that the entire post is the default for the show notes into the podcast, in the default, in the settings. And let me actually show you this because it kind of struck me as crazy that they did this, and it took me a little while to figure out exactly how to go in and change it. That wasn't me thinking about how to share. I know how to do this because I've been on StreamYard for years. They're a sponsor and I adore them. But I was wondering, do I really want to show you this? Do I really want to show you this? And I think I do. Okay, so here we go. Oops. Okay, so this is not the post. This is the post settings. So once you go into, let me backtrack a little bit even more. Here's the post itself. Obviously, this one's already written. If you go down to the settings down here at the bottom right, you'll see that the podcast stuff is in here. I mean, it's labeled, but it's not super clear. It says add audio to podcast RSS feed. Okay, yeah, that's great. And then it says episode notes, which is not generally what show notes are called, but that's okay. It's a different platform. If you click on the question mark there, it says changing information here will update your podcast description and external podcast players like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That was not always on there. I don't even think that was on there in November, but maybe it was. But the point was, I didn't think it would automatically do that. And it took me a little while to go in and do some QCing to see that they literally put the entire post into the show notes. You actually have to go in here and edit and change it to what you want. And this one, I already did that. I have my short summation and some links that I want in there. But you have to consciously go in there and do that, which is a little bit strange to me because I don't know. I guess I'm used to dealing with podcast hosts, and the show notes are very clearly front and center. And if you are like that too, then it will be a bit of an adjustment. And now you know. that you have to specifically go into the settings to change the show notes. So that is one thing that I don't like that Substack has as a default. And all of these things that I'm saying about them, I have said to them, but that leads me to number 2. Is that number 2? Oh gosh. Oh my gosh, I don't even have the suckiest thing as the suckiest thing on here because it all right. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Their support. Oh, I Here's the thing. They're growing so intensely fast and having the right support staff is super hard. And I understand that. And honestly, the Substacks that I've had the past year have not been paid. They've been free. So should I have exceptional support when I'm not paying for a service? Probably not. But oh my gosh. I mean, even when I was asking about turning on paid services or adjusting things for paid services when trying to get the monetization going, it still took forever to get a reply. The replies were vague and not helpful. And even though I put the link to the specific Substack that I was talking about, they would say, well, could you let us, give us the link of your Substack? And I literally had to say one time, it's in my original email. And they're like, "Oh, didn't see that." It's just stuff like that over and over and over. I'm guessing the staff is super, time pressed and super busy, but that's number 2. Number 2 is the support isn't good. I have a plus for that on the positive side that I might get to, but, yeah. So number 3 is the distribution hiccups. Um For 2 of my podcasts that I had hosted on Substack, the logo for the podcast did not make it over onto Apple Podcasts. I had to actually specifically reach out to Apple Podcasts and ask them what the problem was because I know the dimensions. I do this for a living. I know the dimensions for podcast logo. I refreshed. I did all of the best practices thingies first, and then I reached out to Apple and said, "Hi, can you help me? What is happening?" And Apple Podcast support has actually gotten a lot better over the past couple of years, and they got back to me both times and fixed it internally. But this only happened. I started other podcasts during this time that weren't on Substack, and that did not happen. So I think there's something wrong behind the scenes between between Substack when you start your podcast there and Apple Podcasts. I don't think that happened on Spotify or the other places that I distributed to, but it definitely happened with Apple. It's not the only time that there's been a disconnect between Substack information for the podcast where it's hosted and the places it's distributed to. That's just one example of that. So that's 2 is distribution hiccups. That's what I'm calling it. Sorry, that's 3. 4 are the change fees. Okay, this one is very persnickety, and I'll take this one. I like to change names of things. You may have noticed. I like to rebrand. I like to experiment. Thus the name Coffee Like Experiments. And in a podcast host, you can change the name of your podcast a gazillion times without changing the RSS feed and losing your subscribers or followers. You can change the name without getting a fee. And this used to be true on Substack. I've been over on that platform for over 3 years, and I have changed names of some of my projects a number of times. And it's never had a charge. But when I went to do it last month to not this one, but a different Substack, there was now a $50 fee to change the name. Not the feed, just the name. And I just, again, it is a free service. They provide a lot for free, but that just, it felt like the beginning of the end of the ease of Substack. Maybe I'm being dramatic. I don't care. What number was that? 4? Whatever the next number is. Bo, 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 bo. Change fees. Analytics. The total number, I have a visual for this, but it makes no sense. And I've asked and gotten replies from support that make even less sense. But the totals and the individual amounts that it's broken into don't match each other. I don't know, nor do I care if they're IAB certified. I probably should, but honestly, I'm there for more of the engagement features, which is on the plus side than analytics. But it's nice to also keep an eye on both, right? Um, numbers and qualitative and quantitative is a good way to go. And so if you're heavily dependent on analytics, I would not rely on Substack for that. The last one, which I think actually is number 6, I numbered these really weird, is there's no dynamic ad insertion. And because it's an email list, essentially Substack is an email platform, a newsletter platform, which sends out a push email to folks. You don't really need to switch out announcements in a dynamic ad insertion in your pre-roll or post-roll, but I still like to have the option, and it doesn't exist. So that's something to be aware of as well. If you are someone that relies on that for announcements or for sponsors or advertisers, then I would say no. So those are the top 6. I give you 6, not 5. 6 things that I think make Substack audio suck. Now, I want to very quickly just name off the 5 things that I think make Substack audio worth trying out for your podcast, because I don't want to give a skewed view. I'm not going to go into as much detail about these. If you want another episode with me explaining these, just let me know. One is, of course, it's a newsletter platform, so you've got an email list built in. I think that's something that a lot of podcasters overlook, is building their email list. Even if you're not monetizing or getting a sponsor, having that direct contact with your audience, mwah, let me do that quickly. Mwah, it's gorgeous. So that is a definite benefit. Number 2 is comments. Another thing that's missing on podcast apps, podcast platforms, is the ability to comment. Similar to YouTube, you've got the post right there, and then you've got the comments down below. Gorgeous. Assuming they go to the Substack post. That does not obviously go out onto all of the platforms, but I'm not going to go into detail. Anyway, comments is a gorgeous thing. Transcripts, their transcripts, whatever AI they're using for that is pretty good. It seems to learn off itself pretty quickly within a single Substack. There are really few mistakes, and right now they're not charging for it. For monetization, it makes monetizing your podcast fairly easy, a lot easier than a lot of other platforms. And if you've got your podcast, your newsletter, and your monetization all in that one place on Substack, that's streamlining a lot of stuff. And 5 are their office hours. As much as I don't like their support email, I do love their Thursday office hours. The moderator is very helpful. The community itself is very lively, and there's a lot of information that you can learn from other people using Substack on there that you just wouldn't get anywhere else. It's a really, really nice, healthy, growing space. Okay, so that's it. Does that answer the question? Does Substack suck for audio? I think it's the ultimate podcast answer. It depends. It depends on why you're doing your podcast. It depends on what you need from your platform. And it depends on what functionality you're reliant on to get the kind of engagement and activity and feedback that you need or want from your listeners. All of those things depend. But I hope these 2 lists help you make a more informed decision before you test it out. It is still free. It is still free to try out. So you could start there and just, as always, keep your audio files. And if you need to, you can switch and or forward your podcast later. It is slightly a pain in the to do that, but that is an option if you wanted to do that. Or if you weren't sure, if you wanted to keep your podcast going for a long time, this might be a free choice, similar to Anchor, what used to be Anchor, which is now Spotify for podcasters, or I think Podbean still has a free choice, or what was the other one? Red Circle still, I think, has a free choice. This might be in the mix for all of that, and it definitely comes with more benefits than just a free podcast platform with all those, list of 5 things that were actually good about it. So the answer is yes and no. This is Steph from Coffee Like Media. StephFuccio.com, that I put over in the chat room, and I'll have it in the full show notes, is where you can find me and my services. I do momentum calls to get you unstuck, launches, and monthly podcast services. I'll also have my audits revamping pretty soon too. Those are a nice deep dive analysis if you want a list of things that you could potentially change to move your podcast forward and reach your goals. All right. Thank you so much. And I'll see you next week. Bye.